So the title of my talk, as you can see, is Why Study Modern Languages in general, I suppose. I will come to in general, but also why study it here at Queen Mary. So one of the first reasons would be to think about the global dominance of English and quite how dominant is that dominance, right? So your knowledge of English can only take you so far because, as you can see, some of these figures, not everybody, in fact, speaks English. So you can obviously connect with all these other people in the world. If you know their language, you can connect much more. So obviously, first of all, it's, as you can see from my figures, 94% of the world do not speak English as their first language. 75% do not speak English at all. So think of, in a way, if you only know English, your sort of access is to a sort of that 25% possibly, a kind of an elite really around the world. And if you want to sort of get communicate with and find out about and get in touch with some of those other people in that 75% of the world, you really need to go beyond English. So. And then we can talk about all the other languages that those people do speak. So 918 million speak Mandarin Chinese, or let's say Mandarin Chinese as a shorthand. 480 million speak Spanish as their first language. Only 379 million speak English, and 221 speak Portuguese. Then. So that's, I could sort of elaborate at greater length about the reasons for being interested in learning a language, but that's the sort of basics of it. So, then to move on to us in Queen Mary, what do we do here? And what languages do we offer here? So this is a list of the languages we offer, as you can see. We break them into so-called subject areas. We sometimes call them sections, but I call them subject areas. So we have French, German, Iberian, Latin American studies. So that shouldn't be a separate bullet point. Spanish, Catalan are part of Latin American studies and Iberian. Portuguese, Russian. So and we also teach at essentially not quite as extended courses at the moment in Arabic, Japanese, and Chinese. Though Chinese, that will change very soon. From 2022 entry, there will be a joint honours program in Chinese. What that effectively means is that you can take. So all of those languages, apart from Chinese, Japanese, and Arabic, I say that Chinese will be added to this list from 2022. You can take them in a whole number of different combinations. So you can take them we need to use the term and with in a slightly different way, but basically and you can take a language and comparative literature. You can take a language and film, a language and linguistics. You can take a language and politics, and you can take it with business management. And the reason why we make a distinction between and with is a sort of and for us means you can take 50% your language and 50% the other subject. With means the majority of what you do, 75% of what you do would be the language, and only 25% would be business management. Okay, so that's what with means in this context, and it's we don't have a language and business management program currently. And the other thing, and a lot of our students, probably the majority, are studying the Modern Languages BA, where you can take 1, 2, or 3 languages, depending on your choice and depending on whether you have an A-level in a modern foreign language or a GCSE and so forth. You can take more than one language together. So this is the BA in modern languages. So essentially the ones in column 1, language 1 means you can take, if you wanted to only learn Russian, or French, or Spanish, or German, you could make that the whole subject of your study. And as I'll come to in a moment, what you do over and above the language itself, because that's a large part of our degree. You could also take any of those languages with any of those languages in the language 2 category. So in other words, all the same ones, plus Portuguese. And as I say, from September 2022, it will also include Chinese, Mandarin Chinese. And then, and you can also take one language as a third language, sort of usually you take that in your second year and then continue with it in your final year. And so the languages you can do in that category are those, as you can see: Portuguese, Catalan, Arabic, Mandarin Chinese, and Japanese. I should say, I'm going to be asking for your questions at the end. So if you do have questions, maybe store them up and we'll get to them in due course. Okay. So, like I said, if you come to study languages at Queen Mary, and in general, if you look at degree, universities offer a modern languages degree or offer languages as a sort of a degree program, you're going to not only study the language, but you'll also study some culture topics. So, so those could be, those are going to tend to be you writing essays, either very often in English, sometimes in the target language, about literary culture, about visual culture and film, about thought and social theory, so sort of the philosophy, if you want, or the sort of ideas that are current and have been expressed in those languages, and then also something about the linguistics. So those are the sort of topics and modules and areas that you can develop within your understanding of that language, right? So the idea is that you use so the language is of intrinsic interest in and of itself, but it gives you a sort of point of access to a wider and deeper culture that's expressed in a whole number of different ways, and typically in those kinds of ways in our modules, right? So I suppose one of the things that's implicit here, particularly with the first three topics, but also with linguistics, is a sense that there's a kind of wider history. So in a way, all of those topics have a kind of access to the history of that country as well, but they don't necessarily frame it as history as such. You kind of look at it through a given text that you look at closely in that language once you're competent to do so. Okay, so and as you can see, what I've written here is that you're kind of introduced. We have a kind of general module in the first year where we introduce you to how to study those topics, because some people they would have studied literature as part of their English GCSE and probably not studied it since. So they haven't got an A level in writing essays about literary topics or film topics or whatever. And therefore, in the first year, we bring you up to speed in how to write those kinds of essays in the context of the university. And then you take options that interest you in those topics later on in your second and final years. Okay, so this is just a little bit about some of how the sort of teaching pattern and how teaching is delivered here at Queen Mary. So obviously the first thing to say is that we offer these languages at a whole number of different levels. So beginner's level, sometimes called ab initio level. So in other words, you could come without any knowledge of, let's say, Russian, and take it from scratch, but any of those core languages. You can also take it having a GCSE in one of those languages. You can also take Russian, any of those core languages. You can also take it having an A level, and in most cases, we cater to heritage speakers as well. In other words, sometimes you could say this is a category that's under the term native speaker, but often a native speaker of a language who didn't spend much of their schooling in say Russia, right? If you didn't do your secondary education in a Russian speaking environment and learn to write essays and so forth, express yourself in literary Russian, you would not be at the same level as someone who's a native speaker of Russian who has done that. I keep on using an example of Russian, but I could use French, right? That's more familiar to most of you, or Spanish. And therefore we call you heritage speakers because you often have a kind of a need for some kind of practice in the language in that respect. So core and compulsory. So basically, the language is once you've chosen a language, that remains a core module that you have to take and you have to pass throughout the whole of your program, unless you were to. You can move up to take 2 languages and then say, okay, well, that language was too much for me, and I go back to the original language. But basically, that's what we mean by core. Compulsory, you have to take certain modules in the first year, and then the module that introduces you to the analysis of culture in the context of a language. It's called Culture and Language, the module. You have to take that. You don't necessarily have to pass it, though we hope you would, and pretty much everybody does. And then you have all these options, right? I'll give you some examples of those in just a second. And those, as I say, you do those in your second and final years. And this is what we call a modular system, right? You choose different modules, and basically you can choose to sort of, if the literary types of things interest you more, you can concentrate on those. If the film and visual culture, art history, interest you more, you can concentrate on that, linguistics, and so forth. Okay, and yes, there's a little bit more. Obviously, there's sort of, you have a lot of classes. Language involves depending on the language, between 5 hours and up to 7 hours of classes with a teacher. I mean, if we come back to what that exactly means in the context of this coming year and in the context of COVID, but it's the number of hours remains the same, and you do have those, and you basically, as you can see, you have 4 modules per term. So these are just some examples of options in your first year. So yes, I've tried to sort of give you an example of ones across the various different languages. So in addition to what you'd be asked to do, the language and an introduction to writing about literature and so forth, you could do modules in Iberian Latin American studies, men, women and song, love, poetry and medieval Iberia. You could do Catalan culture, art, literature and football. You could do a module on post-colonial francosphere. I think Rebecca, who teaches that, will be giving a taster session later on today for French people interested in French, so you may be able to talk to her about that. Picturing a Nation, images that sort of structure the sort of French ideas of themselves. Germany Today, Russian short stories, a module taught by me. And then you could see Austria Today, German Romanticism, and can you see, yes, a Russian language play, and colonial power and desire in Portugal and Brazil. So those are just some examples. The language classes, typically, particularly for oral classes, the limit tends to be 10. Otherwise, it's 20. So you do get taught in relatively small classes. In what we call the content, in other words, the culture courses, that tends to be 40. And often there'll be a lecture and seminars where you'll be split into smaller groups or into seminar groups. And the first year module, you might have a lecture that's very big, though. You might have a lecture with 80, 90 people in before you have the smaller seminar groups. Okay, so year abroad. I've got to make sure I leave. I'll try and run through this fairly quickly because I want to leave about 10 minutes for your questions and the questions potentially that may be coming in from those joining us online. So for us, for the modern languages degree, the year abroad what we sometimes refer to as the immersive year abroad is a key aspect of how we think about the learning of the language, and precisely this notion of the immersion, the sense that you're in a kind of entirely target language environment, a language where everybody speaks to you. You have to, and if you want to order something, you've got to use the language and so forth. So it's linguistic fluency, but it's also a kind of sense of adapting to that culture, even the bureaucratic norms of that culture, and the experiences that you wouldn't really get if you don't live there on a day-to-day basis. Some of you, maybe have already had that displacement coming to the UK, but it's an interesting thing to have going to a country where you're learning the language too. You can study in various different places. I'll give you a list of some of them. And you can teach English in schools in a lot of places, not all places. So Russia is quite tricky with work visas to teach, for example, but it's not impossible or unheard of to get a work placement of some kind in somewhere like Russia as well. So, so study, teaching English, or work placement. And these are some of the work placements. We have all these various different places. We've had people before. So a little bit about careers. So it is the case that language graduates are in demand, and it's the fact is that in many schools around the country, there are fewer people being produced with language skills in this country, and so those who have them are even more in demand than before. And we have some figures that relate to that. 87% are in employment further study, and 100% after their second year, and that's more than even. I don't know if you can see that. For some reason, it's all very grey, but that says business management is 79% and 87%, respectively, according to recent figures. Okay, so and the careers could be working using your language as a key aspect of what you're doing. Language teacher, interpreter, translator, consultant of some kind. Subtitling, website design, but they could be something where it's not the core. It's an add-on. The language is sort of an extra thing that you offer. That's not the main thing. Where you have other skills that are core, and those could include banking, multinational corporations, law, with a conversion course, the Foreign Commonwealth Office, for example, marketing, journalism, media, publishing. Okay, just some examples of recent graduates, the sorts of things they do. I can add to this somebody who, she uses her Russian, one of my recent former student, to check out the dodgy dealings of Russian investors by checking where their internet footprint. But teaching a foreign language, for example, is something. These project managers, translator, obviously, different types of translator, the Institute of Linguists, editing, Bundesliga.com, football blog, I guess, and events at, literary publishing, you see an example of that. You see an example of media advisor. You see an example of business development. Okay, so just a little bit about our own reputation. We've done very well in the National Student Survey, which is a kind of opinion survey, effectively, of students' opinion about things. And many of we don't always have scores for Russian, for example, because we don't always have 10 per year. Sometimes the cohort is slightly smaller than that, so we don't have 10 people completing it. So, we get sort of scores that are better than, and certainly comparable than many others in the other languages. You can see recent examples. Okay, some student testimonies. some very positive ones. You can see those here, but you can talk to some current students, I think, in part of your tour. And so just by way of leaving you with, I imagine you're going to go to open days at more than one university. So you might sort of ask yourself some of these questions of us and of the others, right? So what the kinds of things hopefully I've covered here, what languages and what levels, what combinations, extracurricular activities. I haven't talked about that, but I can do if you want to, if you ask me a question. Support for the year abroad, satisfaction testimonies that you've just seen here, but also the kind of what's it like in terms of the classroom environment. You could ask yourself, you know, what the size of class is going to be like, what sort of atmosphere. Well, you know, that's something for you to maybe judge and gauge for yourself as you walk around at one place or another. The quality of teaching. Again, you know, you could try to sort of surmise something about that, the facilities, the approach to student life. Okay, I think I'll stop there.